Hello, Toxic Love community. I'm your host, Dean Quirk, and this particular channel, as you know, is focused on building, firstly, community. So that's growing our community of those interested in finding out and learning more around these particular control patterns of domestic abuse that operate within partnerships and within families. So over the last few weeks, we have looked at a number of different topics. We've described the mechanics behind domestic violence and abuse. We've also looked at different types of domestic violence perpetrators, and we've presented you with the idea of looking at the cobra and also as well the pit bull types. So I really want to thank you and acknowledge you for, first of all, connecting with the posts and the videos, but also as well for your questions and comments. So for today's particular video, I'm really excited because, and not just excited, I'm really grateful. And I'll tell you why. And that's because I've got a wonderful guest on today who I will let introduce herself, who really needs really the acknowledgement for her bravery and courage to step up and present her story. So her lived experience around the topic of coercive control. So in the media at the moment, we know that the coercive control, we're pushing for laws to be ordained by our government that stipulate that perpetrators of coercive control can be tried for these particular crimes in coercive control. And interestingly enough, when we think of coercive control, we're not always able to understand exactly what that means. So this is really going to be the benefits of today's interview. That's because our guest is going to explain coercive control in her words and what that particular pattern resulted in her life. But she'll always also talk about her lived experience, which is really important. So by the end of this particular interview, we should have some real opportunity to give you some specific signals about if you're in a coercive control environment, if you're caught up in that particular cycle. We will give you some signals of what to look out to and what to do, or more importantly, what to do to break that particular cycle. So without further ado, I'd like to invite my guest, Rita, to introduce herself to you.
Hello, my name is Rita, and I live in Port Douglas in far north Queensland. I've lived here for 5 years, having emigrated from the UK. Would you like me to tell all my story now, or are you going to ask me questions?
So thank you, Rita. So the first question I have for you, Rita, is firstly, in your own words, describe to our viewers what your experience with coercive control was like. What did the pattern look like? What was your experience?
My experience goes back to the early 1990s, 1993 to 1999. And of course, at that time, I'd never heard of the words coercive control. It's only in recent years that I've heard of those words. But I married a man who seemed a regular sort of guy. I'd been married before. He was single. I was 40. He was 2 or 3 years older, so we weren't teenagers. And I met him, we dated, all seemed well. But even before we were married, I started to detect something that wasn't quite right, in that he'd say something or do something, and then the next day it would be something completely opposite. And I thought, this is a bit strange, but he was a nice guy. I liked him. I loved him. I must have loved him. I married him. Although I do remember that little hesitation as I began to walk up the aisle, but that's neither here nor there. And so we got married and we started to live together. Now, as I say, I'd been married before, he hadn't. And I think whenever he did something that I thought was odd, which I'll explain in a moment, I would think, oh, it must have been due to his upbringing. What did I know? But he was the only child of an older couple who had him when they were in their late 30s, early 40s. His dad was a very strict disciplinarian, a policeman, a UK policeman of the old school, who would march the streets of the West Midlands town where they lived. And if children were doing something wrong, they'd get a clip round the ear, that sort of, and he was a big, big chap. And his wife, my husband's mother, was a very downtrodden soul. Even when I saw her for the first time, I thought, oh my goodness, she was under the power of her husband. And so that's how my husband was brought up. But not only that, he also had a second mother and father, really, in that his mother's sister lived only a few doors away and they had no children. And so he was sort of like their son as well. And that was the same relationship, great big uncle and little downtrodden mother. So that was how he was brought up. Whether that has any significance to what people are listening to now, I don't know. But I used to look at that and think, oh, he had a bit of a funny upbringing. Maybe that's why he's like he is. So let's talk about how he was. To the outside world, we were a happy couple, lived in a nice house, net curtains, 2 cars. We both had a job. Oh, what could be better? He was a member of various local organisations, as was I. And he was a school teacher, and I was a secretary. And really, in a way, that was the start of many things. He was a teacher, he had a university degree, he taught physics at the local comprehensive school, and I know from what other people tell me that he liked to have the power over the children. That because he, like his dad, he was a big chap, a big bruiser chap. And so when he had, these 11 and 12-year-olds sitting in front of him doing the physics, he was Mr. Powerful, and I'm sure he enjoyed that. Now, I had a very, very good job in London, and I was a secretary, but to him, I was just a typist. I may as well have been emptying the waste paper bins and sweeping under the desks. I had no significance at all. He was the man, he was the teacher, he was the big boy. I was just somebody who worked in some office somewhere in London. What he never would say was that I had a very important job I was the secretary to 2 eminent surgeons and lots of responsibility. I was on lots of secretarial committees in and around the City of London. I was on committees to promote secretarial work and what it was about and how it was changing in government ministries. I had a very good job myself, but that was always made very clear that I was the secondary person as far as jobs were concerned. Okay, maybe a lot of people are in that situation. But not major, but one of the big things that I knew was the unpredictability of life. Picture the scene, breakfast table, Sunday morning, sitting round, him and me, nice house in the country. We had a dog. In fact, at one time we had 2 dogs. Okay, sitting at the table. On the table, perhaps there'd be the marmalade jar and the jam jar. Perhaps there was only a little bit in the jam jar, just for one person. And he'd say to me, what can I pass you? And right from the early days, that would put me into a quandary, thinking, oh, if I say I want the jam, he might want it. So I better say I want the marmalade. Or if I want the marmalade, he'd say, why don't you want the jam? It needs to be finished. Now, how trivial does that sound now? Even as I speak, I could tell to many people that would be trivial. But to me, that was a heart-pounding moment at the beginning of a day, because I was always second-guessing. And that was something I wasn't used to. I was used to chatting, making a lot of decisions myself, but it was often second guessing on such minor things as the jam. but I can just think of that as one instance. And so that puts you on edge, or would put me on edge for the rest of the day. And it was things like that, the second guessing and the turning. 1 minute, absolutely fine. The next minute, boom, completely different. We'd be driving along. We lived in a very nice part of southern England, driving along in the car, chatting, chit-chat. He'd be driving, I'd be the passenger, chat, a bit of banter, and, you know, saying things. And then all of a sudden, if I said something that I thought was banter, he would take it as, why are you saying that? In an instant. And that would change everything. So then, no matter how far away we were from home, then we'd either drive back at 100 miles an hour in silence, or we would just stop somewhere and he would just stop and sit in the car. And I'd say, oh, let me drive if you're tired or da, da, da. But no, that was never, we would just sit. And I was too scared to get out. Now, when people look at me then and now, they see a confident person, which I am now, and I was then at the beginning of the relationship. But the relationship was changing because I could never anticipate what the next move would be. Nothing was ever straightforward. And a huge part of all this was being isolated from friends and family. And this is something I read about in Coercive Control, the isolation. So in those days, we're talking 1990s, before mobiles really. So you'd have a house phone, a proper telephone. Okay, the telephone would ring and maybe I would answer it. It would be my sister who lived 200 miles away in England. Oh, and I'd be so delighted. And sometimes maybe we were watching the television or something. So in those days, you couldn't move the telephone. You had to be where the telephone was. You couldn't carry it around with you like a mobile. And so sometimes he'd turn the television down or off, and that would be fine. But other times he would start huffing and puffing, wanting me to get off the phone to my sister. Maybe I'd only been on a minute or two, and I haven't spoken to her for maybe a couple of weeks. And I would be all the time on edge thinking, oh, I must finish this conversation. I must finish this conversation. But really, I didn't want my sister to realize what the situation was. But she's no fool. She knew what you can sense when somebody is uneasy in a telephone call. And so again, a bit like the jam, this sounds so insignificant, but it was huge. And it was the same with friends. Friends would ring, friends would call. Sometimes he'd be absolutely fine. Oh, come on in, let's put the coffee on. Other times he'd go upstairs, slam the bedroom door and shout down, let me know when they've gone. And I never knew the differentiation. I never knew whether it was going to be a good day or a bad day. And so little by little, my friends would stop contacting me because they could understand, especially women friends. Women are very perceptive, very, very perceptive. And they would understand what was going on and try and then so they'd just leave me for a while and think, oh, I better not ring her because we don't want to upset the apple cart. And that's how it was, the isolation. And am I allowed to go on a bit longer? Am I getting too boring?
No, I'm fascinated. Now keep going, Rita.
Keep going, okay. I remember in particular my niece's wedding. Now I've only got one sister and I've only got one niece. And it was a big wedding in the north of England. And we're living so far away, I wasn't part of the pre-wedding arrangements, you know, let's go and choose the dress, choose the flowers, choose the location. I wasn't part of that because I lived too far away. And so on the weekend of the wedding was on a Saturday. 2 or 3 weeks before that, I said to my husband, oh, I think I would really like to go up the day before, the Friday, just so I can be part of the excitement of this lovely, lovely wedding. Well, there was absolutely blue smoke coming out of his head. And this was 2 or 3 weeks before, because he said that was just ridiculous. And that would mean that he'd have to come up on that day and it would cause so many problems at school. And so perhaps he could come up on the Saturday and I would go up on the Friday, and it all got so complicated. But somehow I managed to stick to my guns. And on the Friday, I got on the train and went up to North Yorkshire, and went and was part of that pre-wedding planning, which I loved, but I knew there was going to be big trouble ahead, because he was going to be driving up the next day, the morning of the wedding. And my heart, I could feel it now, was pounding when on what should have been a beautiful day. And he knew how important this wedding was and how much I loved my niece, still do. He knew how I would be feeling. And so I knew vaguely what time he'd be arriving at the hotel on the Saturday morning. And sure enough, he turned up. And then when he turned up at this, and I was getting all ready and excited, but I knew he was far from excited. And he said, oh, I need to go for a long walk after that drive. Okay. So it got nearer and nearer the time of the wedding, and he didn't appear. So off I went to the church, feeling absolutely dreadful, because I didn't know where he was. And as we were in the church, the bride was standing at the door, and as the bride was due to start walking up the aisle, in he walked to the church, from the back of the church, and he had really heavy shoes on. Bang, bang, as he walked up the aisle so that everybody could see him. And then he came and sat by me. Oh, I can see that moment right now. He knew that was killing me, really, really hurting me deep. After the wedding, we went back to the hotel, and he was just in such a foul, foul mood. And so we went back, instead of being at the reception for a lot of the time, we went back to the room in the hotel, and so that he could moan at me even more. And that was just a classic example, distancing me from family. And that was so, so hurtful. And he knew it was hurtful. He definitely knew that was hurtful. Another thing that I can mention, I talked about my work. With my work, I often got invited to very smart do's, cocktail parties, tickets to the Royal Albert Hall in somebody's box. It was private practice. We had patients who were very wealthy from all over the world, particularly the Middle East. And so we got lots of invitations to all sorts of things. So they would invite me and my husband. And I can remember 3 occasions particularly, and there were many more. If you've ever lived in London, you've been to the Chelsea Physic Garden. That is just the most beautiful, beautiful place. It was a summer's evening. And my boss and other people have invited me to join them in for drinks in the Chelsea Physic Garden, and then afterwards for dinner. And so I went straight from work, and he was going to come up on the train from where we lived. Did he arrive? No. I waited at the station. I waited and I waited and I waited, and knew he wasn't going to turn up. I mean, as I say, this was in the days before mobile, so that I wasn't, able to contact him. And so I went to the Chelsea Physic Garden feeling absolutely sick to my stomach, because I was late arriving. I was on my own, and I knew at the end of this beautiful evening, I had to go home and face it. And when I got home, he said, oh, he didn't feel well. He had a chill or a cold or something. And so he couldn't possibly have come up to London. And there were 2 more occasions of equal importance, and could have been beautiful evenings when no, because he was the teacher. He had the power. He'd been to university. You were just a typist going to some tea party. And that was how he made me feel. And I did feel that. He was very successful at it. He was very, very clever at making me feel like this. And I would share this with my friends. I would tell, on the quiet, of course, people did know what I was going through, and they would try and sympathize. I didn't know anyone who was in my position. Lots of my friends had trouble with their husbands. Everyday sort of stuff. But nobody I came across was in my situation. And so on and on it went. We'd go on holidays abroad. Everything would be fine, just fine. And then, woof, no matter where we were, we went to the south of France a lot. We'd pick up a hire car wherever we went and rent a house for a week. Sometimes it would be just so beautiful. Other times, no. And I could never tell. Even though, I consider myself a bright little button, no way could I tell when that difference was going to show itself. So on it went. Why did I stay 5 years? That's what I say to myself. That's what other people ask me. But, and I'm sure lots of people are going to agree with this, I thought it was going to get better. How foolish was that? How could it possibly get better? But I was trying to convince myself all the time that it was going to get better. And like I said, I wasn't a teenager. By this time, I was mid-40s. And so I thought, well, get out, Rita, just get out. But I didn't. But as the years went on, I realized little by little, far too late, why ever it didn't occur to me before, I needed to be as clever as him. And so once a week, not only did he teach in the comprehensive school, he taught at night school. And so once a week on a Tuesday evening, he'd go out, he'd come back from school, have a bit of something to eat, and then drive off in his car about an hour away to a technical college where he taught physics at night to adults once a week on a Tuesday. And even that was fraught, because when he was coming back, I'd have a sandwich ready for him and the kettle on and all this. And sometimes he'd come in and say, oh, I don't know how that, he'd throw it at the wall and say, no, that's disgusting. I don't know how you're supposed to eat that. Then at other times he'd say, oh, thank you so much. That's how it was. And so I knew I needed to go into clever mode. And so on these Tuesday nights, this is when the clever, well, what I thought was clever, started. When he went out, as soon as the car went off the drive, I would go up into the office and I would start looking through the paperwork, because he wasn't without money and he kept a lot of secrets from me. He had loads of insurance policies. People in the 70s, 60s, 70s, they always had insurance policies for all sorts of things. And I'd go through all this paperwork and I'd secrete it and I'd put it in my bag. And the next day I'd take it to work and photocopy it all and then bring it back. He didn't realize. He did. Now, if it had been another woman, I think if somebody had been doing that to me, I would have noticed straight away. I can tell when a piece of paper has been moved a centimetre. But men, in my vast experience, oh my goodness, they're not as savvy as that. So I would take all these things, bank statements, but I had to wait until the next Tuesday to do it. And so every Tuesday night I'd be frantically sorting out these things and taking them to work, photocopying them, because my plan was to leave. And so alongside this, I thought, now what do I need if I'm going to leave and go and live in London and find a flat somewhere? And so I thought, I don't want very much at all. I want my clothes. That was quite easy. And I thought, I could do with a few bits of cups and saucers. So I thought, right, well, one will do. A cup, a saucer, a mug, a plate, knife and fork. And I used to secrete these around the house. And when I knew he wouldn't look. And so this went on for weeks. And of course, I was nearly sick. Every day I was nearly sick. But I thought, no, come on, be positive, Peter, be positive. And so the day dawned. It was a Sunday, and I'd got everything in place. I'd organised myself a flat in London to move into. And by this time, his mother, everybody else had died, but his mother was alive, and she was living in a nearby nursing home. He'd moved her down to live near, only half an hour from where we lived. And on a Sunday, he would bring her to our house for Sunday lunch. Okay? So I was the one who was to cook the Sunday lunch. He gets in the car to go and fetch his mother. And I knew that would be my golden opportunity. So as soon as he'd gone, I got all this paperwork together, my cup and saucer and spoon and clothes, because we had two cars, put everything in the car, absolutely everything that I could. And it was a rainy day, and it was, and the drive was on a slope. By the time I'd been up and down this drive about 50 times, I was an absolute wreck, but I didn't mind how much of a wreck I was. I got in the car and I drove to London and I left him a note. I mean, oh my goodness, they're called Dear John notes, aren't they? And knowing that when he came back so it'd be half an hour there, he'd be gone about an hour. And I left him a note saying, gone forever. And I got in the car and went to London. And I thought, then I was terrified. Once I got to London, I was terrified. Once I got in the flat and got my things around me, I thought, oh my goodness. He didn't know where I was, but I thought, you have nightmares. You think, he must be able to find out. And I used to go out in the morning, this was in London, and sort of look round the corners of Regent Street and Oxford Street to see if he was lurking. Well, I knew he wasn't really, but that's how I felt. I was so scared. But I made the decision and I ran. I took the car and ran. And it was several months before he got in touch with me. But oh my goodness, what a release. What a release. And people remarked immediately, like in the following week, they'd say to me, have you had your hair what's that? You know, you're looking different. Have you got new clothes? I said, no, because I am free. And that's my story.
Wow. Well, thank you. Well, it's an amazing story that you just shared there, Rita. So thank you for your, your courage to share that. And look, there's lots of questions to explore within that particular story. But yeah, just, I guess, well done for your, I guess, that insight that you had, to adopt that cleverness, if you like, to start thinking about, okay, how do I get away from this? How do, what steps do I need to take to gain my safety, first of all, and then to find freedom? So well done on taking those steps. Some questions I have. I guess, yeah, breaking it down, because it's an amazing story. Do you feel your experience, because your first, I guess the first phase of the story was, or the warning signs, if you like, the warning signs was, you mentioned that scenario around the jam, the jar of jam and marmalade, and obviously not having much jam in one and then marmalade in the other. And you had that dilemma in your mind that, if I ask for the jam, he's going to say, well, hold on, there's not that much left. You're going to take it all. Or if you didn't ask for the jam, it would have been, why don't you finish it off? That sort of dilemma. Where, I guess, my question is where did you feel that particular pattern starting to develop around that particular scenario? What was it? What was you frightened of in that particular moment?
I was frightened of his anger. His mantra to many of his bloke friends, if they were talking in a pub or if I heard him in a group with others, he would, and they would talk, I mean, not that men would talk particularly about domestic violence, but if the situation arose, he would say, oh, I think it's absolutely terrible when you read in the papers about men hurting women, about men beating them. How dreadful is that? How just dreadful to have that sort of anger, to want to hit a woman. That's dreadful. I would never do that. So the jam and marmalade situation, yes, I was terrified because I was frightened of his anger, not that he was going to hit me, because he'd said, and yes, he was right, he never hit me, but when you're standing by the kitchen window and he's in such a rage that he throws his size 12 hiking boot at you, but knowing that it's only going to skim past your ear and smash through the window behind you, that is anger. That is, he didn't touch me. The boot didn't touch me. The glass didn't cut me, but that was the situation. And that was just one of many, which were absolutely terrifying. I don't hit women, but that incident with the hiking boot was absolutely devastating.
Wow, look, great explanation. So, breaking that particular scenario down, it sounds like he was using intimidation to keep,
oh, very much so.
Yeah, to keep to keep you small, or keep you entrapped, I guess. So, the fear of violence was there, very strong. You said he was a large man as well.
Yes. Oh, he was a big guy. He was tall. He was heavily built, and so yes, he had no problem in. We were at his mother's once and he was in such anger with her, she'd upset him about something. He actually lifted an automatic washing machine. He lifted it from the kitchen and in his rage threw it out of the back door into the garden. And you know how heavy, I mean, we're talking of a proper big automatic, that was how his anger was. Wow.
So I know fully, those descriptions there, we can fully get a good visualization of those fears, and quite rightly so. You were fearful of what he could do, and that anger, that explosive anger. I guess when we look at perpetrator types, it seems very characteristic of the pit bull type. that explosive anger when
Yes.
you know, things are not done the way he wants things to be done. Really
Yes.
good explanation there, Rita. And the other scenario which I found well, worrying, you know, really worrying for you in that particular situation was when you were on the phone to your sister, you said, he would start huffing and puffing.
Yes.
What was that? What do you think that particular scenario was all about? What was he trying to achieve in that moment?
I think he was anxious that I wasn't going to say to my sister what a terrible life I was living, as if I would do it when he was present. But I think that was part of it. He thought I was going to sort of confess all to my sister. I didn't need to confess. She knew. And so he would be huffing and puffing because he wanted me for himself. He didn't want me to be near anybody else. He wanted to have total control, as I now know it, coercive control over me. He didn't want my bosses at work to have any control over me. My friends, he didn't want them to call. I was his. My sister, no, definitely no. He didn't want me to be having chatty conversations with people because presumably he thought if I talked to other people too much, I might think, oh, what sort of life am I living? But I already knew what sort of life I was living, but that was his fear.
Wow, that's a great description. Perfectly sums up that part of coercive control, that, you know, he's really breaking those connections, if you like, to family and friends. That's a really strong element, as you know from reading the work of Evan there around,
yes,
you know, around those issues around coercive control, which is to first of all create isolation. And you described it beautifully. How far, so in regards to isolation, so when you got married, did you move away from you know, family and friends to set up home together? What happened at the beginning?
No, not really. I didn't move far at all. I lived in the south of England. We met and we moved in together. So I still had the same well, not family. My family had always, I'd been living in the south of England or in London for many years. So my family had always lived a good way, 200 miles away. But I'd always had a lot of contact with them. I'd either driven up there or I'd gone up on the train, King's Cross to Doncaster, easy train journey. So I was, even though I was a long way away, I was very much in touch with them. And I had the same group of friends around me before we got married as I did when we got married. And he was obviously so clever because the friends I had, and I'm still in touch with some of them all these years on, they had no idea that he was like that. They didn't, and they've said this to me, if we'd have picked up on any warning signs ourselves, we'd have been the first in the queue to tell you. But he was so clever at being one person 1 minute and another person the next minute that even friends didn't pick up on it. In fact, two of my girlfriends, they were also teachers at the same school with him. And so they had, a lot of contact with him for a number of years, and they had no idea he was like that. He was just a completely different person in school.
Wow, it sounds like he was trying to cover his tracks as much as possible so that others wouldn't find out. I guess you were alluding to that when you mentioned that your suspicions was the reason he was trying to break up that relationship you had with your sister on the phone was he didn't want it to get out or he didn't want you sharing how bad a life you were experiencing with him. What do you think was underlying of that? What do you think, if you were to be a fly on the wall in that situation and be looking at him specifically, what do you think was at the root of things for him?
I certainly think it goes back to his upbringing, like I said right at the very beginning. I don't think he really ever had a close relationship with his own mother and father or his aunt and uncle who lived almost next door. They were overpoweringly proud of him, but I don't think he had a soft, warm relationship. As I say, his dad, the old-fashioned policeman, big brusque, get on with it. His mother, downtrodden. and a very similar situation with his aunt and uncle who lived next door, who didn't have any children. So he had two sets of parents, but really not a close, intimate relationship with any of the four of them. And I think when he heard me being friendly with my friends, friendly and loving with my sister, I think that stirred up something inside of him that he knew he'd never experienced. And so he didn't want me to experience it either.
So so if we was to put a label on, you know, his characteristics or his behavior, would you say he had sort of sociopathic tendencies? Was he able to share empathy and stuff with others? What was your
definite
experience?
Yeah, sociopathic tendencies, definitely. I'm reading what you sent me. The sociopath's need is for power. Oh yes, he was the 10 out of 10 for that. Yeah, it was the power that he was able to use on me. I mean, sometimes I wonder why he picked me. He'd never been married before, and he was 43. He'd had girlfriends before, and so I never didn't know any of those women. So I'm just wondering, of course, over the years, it comes into my mind from time to time, what did they make of it? Is that why I think he'd been engaged 4 times before me? Because like I say, he was 43, and I would imagine, I can only guess, that in at least some, if not all of those relationships, a similar sort of thing had happened, and they got out quick before they married him.
Interesting. I guess my question to you, Rita, is what did you fall in love with? What was, you know, I guess what was your image of him in your mind? You know, what things did he tick in the box for you?
Well, I was working as a secretary at a hospital, and we were introduced by one of the nurses who knew him and knew me. She introduced us, and I remember him coming. I'd vaguely seen him. I think he'd been to deliver something to her at the hospital, so I had sort of had a glance of him, and he was not unattractive. He was a big guy, but he wasn't unattractive. And I thought, and I sort of vaguely remembered him. And then when I remember him, I think we spoke on the phone, and he said, "Oh, I'd like to take you out." And so I said, "Oh," and he said, "Oh, I'll come and pick you up." And so he came to my house, and I could see it now. And I opened the door and to him, and there was this big guy, and he was really smartly dressed, had a nice car, and sometimes he would smoke a cigar. And when he opened the door, I could smell this cigar. And it was just lovely. I thought, God, look at this manly man. And he wasn't unattractive, he was smartly dressed. He had a nice bit of aftershave as well. But this sort of hint of cigar, how many years ago is it now? Oh, I can still smell it. And so I was attracted to him physically. We went out for a meal, and he was very chatty, he was a charmer. He was definitely a charmer. And I presume that was that should have, you know, brought some red flags. He certainly was a charmer, and we kept on going out, and we had lovely times. And I would think we went out for perhaps 6 months or more before he asked me to marry him, and it was just fine. There was no hint that anything was any different from any chap I'd been out with before. It was only once we got engaged, once he'd got that ring on my finger as an engagement ring, then that was when I first noticed he'd got me. And that's what makes me say his other 4 women who'd been engaged to him, I think they probably had the same experience, but were out.
Wow, it's interesting. So many warning signs there as you share that, you know, and very characteristic of, you know, that first initiation of that control pattern, if you like, you know, the charming, like you said, turns up, well dressed, not unattractive, as you mentioned there, manly man, you know, it was ticking all the boxes for you. So I'm guessing in that particular situation, he was very very good at playing the game, if you like, to be able to identify those things that you liked early on and started,
Oh,
you know.
yes, I'm sure. Yeah, he was a game player. Yes, I'm sure he had his stall set out right from that first encounter at my front door, that he got me, and that or on the charm, this, that, and the other, and then, you know, go on from there. And I'm sure that was all part of his plan. But he would, I mean, yeah, we had many outbursts and rows, of course, about all this. It was not just me sort of sitting quietly in the corner during the 5 years that we were married and all this was going on. We had some huge rows. And I would often say to him, oh, you know, and I would say to him, you've planned all this. Look, this is all working out just as you wanted it. Look at me 5 years ago. Look at me now, absolute wreck. But of course, he would always deny that. No, that was, and he would often advise me that I needed psychiatric treatment because I'd obviously got hold of the wrong end of the stick every time, and that and in any case, my opinion wasn't worth listening to.
Yes, yeah, alarm bells are ringing there, Rita. So my question is, in a lot of cases, obviously, with these particular patterns, if you like, so when we look at coercive control, but look at the pattern behind it, look at the controlled initiated pattern of violence, it often increases in frequency and severity over time. Did you feel this was the case in your 5 years of marriage? Did it start and progressively get worse?
Oh, without a doubt. It was, when I think about it, when I speak about it, I refer to it as the drip, drip, drip. And then it would be drip, 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 then drip, 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 drip. It was a steady, ongoing procedure. And of course, there would be times when everything in the garden was rosy. And that in itself was worrying because I knew that was going to come to an end. Would it come to an end this evening? Would it come to an end next week? Who knows? I didn't know. And he was in control of when that would happen, when the turning point would come. And so my whole life was just second guessing. How can I please this man? And I didn't want to please him. I wanted out, but I was frightened to leave because I thought, oh, if I leave, he's going to find me and do something really awful. And so it just changed me completely. And so if that was 1990, so it's 2000. I left in 1999, just before the celebrations of the year 2000. So that's 21 years ago. But so I've been left in for 21 years. But as I say these stories now, it's like they happened yesterday. They've made such an imprint on my life, but not such an imprint that I've not been able to turn my life around, move to the other side of the world and get on with it. That's good. But I'm sure a lot of people in my situation would never get out of that mess. And those ensuing years would just be part of their lives forever.
So in thinking of the pattern, and if we were to look at this through the lens of addiction, say, not too dissimilar to that of a gambler, that you know, as they keep gambling, they're trying to you know, fill that void, if you like. They just keep having to get more and more and more, or they're betting more, taking more and more risks. Could this be something that was driving your ex-husband?
Oh yes, yes, I can definitely liken it to addiction, and that word has come into my mind from time to time over the years, because whereas at times it would just be between me and him, or there would be a third party involved, like going to a party or whatever it was, and he wouldn't turn up, he did start doing things nearly in the face of his friends. So there would be one occasion, one of his friends was 50, I think it was, and we were invited to it was a Sunday afternoon, and they had a big house, a big garden, not far from where we lived, 20 minutes, and it was going to be a lovely occasion. And so I think I drove the car, we went there, and as soon as we got, and that's right, he was being asked to give a speech. This was his best friend, okay, this bloke and his wife. And my husband was asked to give us, not a speech, say a few words, and, you know, happy birthday and da-da-da. So he gets there, and I park the car, and he gets out and he says, oh, I don't want to do a speech. It's just ridiculous. Who wants to do a speech? I'm going home. And so I said, oh, okay. So I went to the car to open the car to drive him back. I mean, as if I was, oh, it must have been crazy. And he said, no, I'll walk back. And this was about 7 miles. So I said, oh, okay. So off he went. I went into this garden party. And so these were his friends. And they said, well, you know, where is he? And I said, well, you know, he's not feeling well and he's had to go home. But your car's there. Yeah, he thought he'd want some fresh air. So he was doing it right in front of his friend, right in front of them. And then I only stayed about an hour because I was worried sick what was going to happen. When I got home, I knew he wouldn't be, because it was a 7-mile walk for him, and I knew he'd walk through the woods, so I wouldn't be able to pass him on the main road. I got home and no sign. I thought, oh, parked the car, went in the house, sat down. I thought, oh, and I looked and thought, yes, it should be coming home about now. No, nothing. And then it got into the early evening. I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Should I go and look for him? I went outside the back door for something, and he was sitting on the bench in the garden. And I said, oh, how long have you been here? He said, oh, about 2 hours. And I had no idea that he'd arrived back. But and after that, my friends, the birthday boy and his wife said, oh, that was a strange thing that he did at the weekend. And fancy not coming to tell us. But that was how close he was. That's how much of a risk he was taking. He wanted to it wasn't just between me and him. He wanted to see how far he could push things. And that's how far it was. And I particularly remember that afternoon.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great observation of you know, the typical pattern around addiction. Wow. So I guess my final question, Rita, is when you obviously you made a decision that you were going to leave, and it seems that was coming for a while, and you know, you started to, you know, every week on that Tuesday to try and, you know, you were photocopying paperwork, you were doing everything you need, you know, you're taking little items, not too significant that it would give yourself away, but you started to build that. Did you have support from anyone around you in what you were doing, i.e. had you, you know, confided in your friends that, look, if anything happens, you know, if he finds out or whatever, if anything happens, can you make sure you check on me? Did you have that sort of support, or was you doing this all alone?
I confided in one girlfriend only, same age as me, and she lived a long way away. She lived in Devon. She still does live in Devon, so that was 200 miles from me, but we were always very close. We'd worked together many years before, and we'd always kept in touch. She was the only person in the world who knew what was happening, and I would give her a blow-by-blow account. And she knew, and on that Sunday, she had her eye on the clock. She knew what time he was going to pick up his mother. She knew what time I'd be driving that car off the drive. And we agreed that we lived about half an hour from the M4. Yeah, we lived about half an hour from the M4 services. And so she said the arrangement was that I would drive to the services, and then, because she said half an hour would be, you know, more than enough for you to have the first step of this journey, park up and ring her. As I say, no mobiles, you had to go to the phone box. And so I rang her from those services and I said, it's done, I'm gone. And so I told her, and she was the only person who knew, and she was extremely supportive. And in fact, she knew because she'd been the recipient of some of his vile behavior. We'd met in some place, a couple of years before that, and we'd gone out for lunch. No, we'd met somewhere. We'd come back to our house anyway, her and me and my husband. And we were sitting round, and I'd cooked something. And he did oh my goodness, it was so classic. He didn't like what he was eating, and this was in our house, and she was sitting there as the guest, and he got the plate and threw it on the ceiling. I mean, he did that many times, but that was when she was sitting there, and she looked at me in amazement, even though she knew what he, you know, various things that he got up to. She'd never seen him do that. And in fact, I think perhaps that was the first time even I'd seen him do it. And so she said, oh, you know, I think something urgent's cropped up, I better go. And so she'd seen him in action. So she was the only person who I confided in. And I was very pleased I did.
Wow. Well, thank goodness for that friend, you know, thank goodness for that support you had. Wow, she provided you a great service, you know, having that support, you know, and being able to confide. And interestingly enough, that she was able to experience his vile behavior. So you know, she had that full trust in and understanding of what you were going through, and knew that you had to get out. You had to get out of that relationship. When you actually got away, you experienced that freedom. You was in London, and I know you was, you know, you're checking around the corners. You know, is he hiding around there? Has he found me? Has he located me? Did you ever look back, or was you always looking forward from that moment?
Oh, I was looking forward the whole time. I never looked back, because I knew I'd done the right thing. I knew it would take me a long time to do it, but I knew the time was right. And so I pushed on. And I was, once I got over that initial, it must have been maybe as much as 6 months thinking you was going to turn up at Oxford Circus. I mean, as if. But that was, you know, a real anxiety. But after, 6 months or so, I'd settled down, and I found a new life for myself, a new positive life that I'm still enjoying, and now I'm 71.
Oh, fantastic. Well done. Big round of applause for you, Rita, you know, for your courage and getting out of it. So in closing, what I'd like to do for viewers of this, they're going to be listening and viewing your story and thinking, wow, this is my relationship. I'm caught in this cycle. I'm so fearful of my partner. Yes, I'm aware that, they're a real charmer at the beginning, but as soon as it felt like they had me, I had the ring on the finger, or the relationship become a bit more serious, they changed. They're going to be in that scenario. So they might be right at the beginning, or they might be a little bit further into that, where they're now experiencing you know, that sort of erratic behavior, that controlling behavior. Their finances might be controlled like you. They may have found paperwork where there's policies and stuff that they didn't even know about, but really they're you know, it's they're entitled to it because they're in a joint partnership. So they may be experiencing that. They may be having you know, their bank restrictions placed on them, and you know, in this side of things. And they might be, like yourself, being isolated from family and friends. In closing, what would you like to say to viewers that are in that position?
I would like to say that if at all possible, remain strong even when the situation seems dire. It took me 5 years. I thought I was a strong person at the beginning. He absolutely undermined me to the point of crawling on the floor. But even the little bit of dignity that I had left, I grasped that. And even though it took me 5 years, I thought, right, I need to grasp this. So if you're in this situation, please look forward. Don't be looking backwards all the time. Think what you can do to safely get out of the situation, because sadly, the situation is not going to change. I waited for 5 years thinking, well, perhaps I waited for 4 years thinking, he might change tomorrow. Believe you me, he will not change. It's you who needs to change. It's you who needs to get a positive hold on this and move forward.
Oh, fantastic, Rita. So you know, just to get those in bullet points form, so you said to stay strong, to keep looking forward, and remembering he's not going to change.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'd like to thank you, Rita, from the bottom of my heart. Just overwhelmed with gratitude for you giving up your time and to sharing your story. I know your story is going to set off a lot of alarm bells for viewers, but it's also going to give opportunity for those viewers as well to get a bit of a plan together about how they're going to break free, how they're going to step away from this relationship, and also to build the courage and strength to keep looking forward and take those steps away. Because as you've said there, it's so important to realize now that they're not going to change, and this cycle's not going to change. In fact, it's going to get worse like it did in your particular situation. So thank you very much, Rita.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.